On June 28, we launched a new initiative of the Center for African American Public Policy at Norfolk State University entitled State of the Water, to bring policymakers, movers, and shakers to you, the community, to discuss issues and solutions to problems that are relevant to you. Now, in this short time, we've brought members of Congress, the U.S. Senate, Lieutenant Governor, state delegates, members of City Council, and community leaders to ask them the hard questions from you, the listeners. I'm your host, award-winning Dr. Eric Claville, and you've responded and we listened. And now, State of the Water is a full hour on NSU's very own WNSB Blazing Hot 91. And to kick off our new one-hour show, we bring to you pre-debate interviews of the two candidates running to represent you in the U.S. Senate for the Commonwealth of Virginia, current Senior Senator Mark Warner and his challenger, Dr. Daniel Gade. That's right, a pre-debate interview. Spartan Nation, for the first time in Norfolk State University's 85-year history, the institution hosted a live U.S. senatorial debate on the campus between Senator Mark Warner and his challenger, Dr. Daniel Gade, at the L. Douglas Wilder Performing Arts Center. On just yesterday, Saturday, October 3rd, the debate focused on racial disparities and inequalities in education, healthcare, economic mobility, and the criminal justice system. Now, the university is Center for African American Public Policy. We partnered with Wavy TV 10, an NBC affiliate and Nexstar Media Group station, also the Virginia Bar Association, and Visit Norfolk, and WNSB to host the debate. The 90-minute debate between the two candidates streamed live on wavy.com. Believe it or not, it's already over 67,000 views. And on Wavy 10, on this Monday, October 5th, they'll re-air the debate across 4 states and the District of Columbia at 6:30 p.m. Now, the debate was moderated by Wavy TV 10 journalists Anita Blanton and Regina Mobley, an alumna of Norfolk State University. Now, we urge all of you to go to wavy.com and view the lead up to the debate itself, where they showcase many stories about Norfolk State University, the history of the university, and its impact in the Hampton Roads community. Now, let's hear what the candidates have to say to you. Welcome. Today we have on State of the Water U.S. Senator Mark Warner, who's running for re-election to be the senior senator here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Senator Warner, welcome to State of the Water.
Eric, thanks for having me on.
Listen, I know on tomorrow there's going to be a broadcast here. You're coming here to Norfolk State University. We're hosting for the first time in our 85-year history a U.S. senatorial debate between you and your challenger, Dr. Gade. We're so excited to have you here on the campus of Norfolk State University.
Well, I'm excited about it as well. I thought particularly this year with appropriate calls for racial justice, with the importance of stating unequivocally that Black Lives Matter, I said I wanted to do at least one of the debates this year at an HBCU. I used to be on the board of Virginia Union up in Richmond, and so I'm very familiar with the HBCUs in Virginia. Started an initiative called the Virginia High Tech Partnership before I was even governor that get kids from our HBCUs into high tech jobs. So I thought it was very appropriate that Norfolk State hosts this debate, and I hope the focus of the debate will be mostly issues around racial justice and racial equality.
You know, Senator, before you were our senior senator here in the Commonwealth, you were our governor of the Commonwealth, and you've always been a friend to all of our higher educational institutions, but also you mentioned HBCUs. Can you tell us how HBCUs hold a special place in your eyes and in the things that you've done?
Well, HBCUs, I think, provide a world-class education, and in too many parts of Virginia, they're not known well enough. This is why, when I was on the board of Virginia Union back in the early '90s, saw what great students coming out of there, coming out of Norfolk State, coming out of Hampton, coming out of Virginia State, and I said, let's get these talented young people into high-tech jobs. We started an internship program, and actually have a couple of recipients of that program with me tomorrow who've gone on to great success in business and technology. I also started an initiative working with students from our HBCUs to have them help do computer training in black churches across the state. That program
awesome.
was called the Tech Writers Program. So I worked with the HBCUs long before I was governor. When I was governor, I was proud that we made record investments in all of our institutions for higher education after a major reform of our tax code. And Virginia got named the best state for business and also the best state for public education from preschool through graduate school. In the Senate, I've tried to continue that and was a lead sponsor, one of the lead sponsors on the Future Act, which put $255 million into our HBCUs. So I know what great students are and great talent is coming out of these universities. I also know it's one of the ways if we're going to really make sure HBCUs continue to prosper, we need not only federal aid, but we also need to grapple with increasingly high cost of education. So I passed a bill just this year that would allow employers to pay down student debt $5,200 a year and have that be tax-free to the employee. And I've also been working on a plan to see if we can refinance all of the student debt down to these record low interest rates. There's no reason you can get a mortgage at 2.75%. You ought to be out paying 8% on your student debt.
That's right. That's right.
You know, I think HBCUs are great, but I also think we got to make sure we deal with the student debt issue.
You know, Senator, you mentioned HBCUs prospering, and right now, a lot of our higher education institutions, K through 12, we're learning now virtually. And, you know, you started your career, you know, in this tech field, and you really hit the ground running with it. How important is technology for our institutions today, especially our HBCUs?
Well, let me, first of all, clarify one thing. I was very fortunate, and I got involved in the cell phone industry and created a company called Nextel. But my first two businesses efforts failed, and I know I've been fortunate, but I also realize that if I'd not been a white man with the appropriate education, I might not have got a third try or a second try or even a first try. So I really think equality of opportunity is what I've been about since before I've been governor and try to continue work as senator. Now with technology, I think technology can be a great equalizer. But as we've seen with COVID, if you don't have access to high-speed internet broadband connectivity, you're going to get left behind.
Right.
And one of the things that I'm working on right now is actually working with Congressman Clyburn from South Carolina. Can we build out high-speed broadband across the whole country the same way that Franklin Roosevelt said in the 1930s every home in America was going to? We need to make sure that every home in America in 2021 has high-speed, have that.
That's right.
And I would also argue that we need to, particularly with these either partially back or fully distance learning, I really think there's an opportunity here to challenge our universities, HBCUs, and other four-year institutions to actually offer college credit for those students who would be willing to help tutor our K-12 students who particularly are still distance learning that might need that additional help during the COVID pandemic. So I think there's some real opportunities that are coming up, but boy, it's gonna take that broadband connectivity for every home.
Senator, you're running for re-election here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Tell us a little bit about your campaign platform. You've done phenomenal things with legislation already that you just discussed. But moving forward, what are you looking at for legislation to help the Commonwealth and more specifically African Americans if reelected? I mean,
I'm very proud of the fact that 55 of my bills have become law. And I point out two that have become law just in the last 2 months. One was a record investment in our national parks and trying to improve the maintenance of those national parks. That'll create 10,000 jobs in Virginia, a lot around the Colonial Parkway there on the peninsula.
Yes.
We're now waiting for a bill that that will be shortly become law. It's passed the House and the Senate, that will actually provide mental health assistance to our veterans to try to take on the issue of veteran suicide, which is a real tragedy in this country. More specifically, for African Americans, we've seen in some of the COVID relief, and let's face it, the African American and Latino community got much harder hit by COVID than the majority community.
That's correct.
And one of the reasons why we desperately need to protect the Affordable Care Act. This is an area where I differ greatly from my opponent. He thinks that the Affordable Care Act ought to go away. I think it ought to be expanded. The Affordable Care Act is the only bill that protects people with pre-existing conditions, 3.5 million Virginians, including my daughter. There is no way. We've heard from Mr. Trump and the Republicans they're going to repeal and replace. Well, they've never come up with a replacement plan. And if my opponent has his way and we do away with the ACA or stack the court with somebody who's going to take on the ACA in the week literally after the election, that would disproportionately hurt African Americans in terms of access to health care. And matter of fact, my opponent has also even said he thinks that the expansion of Medicaid, which got 400,000 Virginians health care coverage, was like giving a child a cookie. And I find that extraordinarily disrespectful. So I think there's health care disparities we need to keep working on. And I've even got legislation that would lower drug prices, which would allow our government to negotiate for drug prices the way other industrial nations, again, benefiting all Americans, but particularly African Americans who pay more out of pocket for drugs than most. On the economic front, and this is where I really think I can add value,
yes.
There's two areas. One, we saw in the recent small business support program, the so-called PPP program, that black-owned businesses, brown-owned businesses, women-owned businesses weren't as successful getting those federal dollars because they didn't have traditional long-term banking relationships. Matter of fact, we've lost 440,000 black-owned businesses have shut their doors since the beginning of COVID. It's generations of wealth being destroyed. I've got legislation that even the Trump administration is supporting that would invest a minimum of $10 billion in black-owned banks and community development financial institutions.
Awesome.
That investment would leverage $100 billion of lending into black and brown communities across America. It would be, if we're really going to try to have a fairer America, you got to have fairer access to capital. There are still huge barriers for African American businesses to get access to capital. Let's invest in those lending institutions that actually will lend into the black and brown community. And this CDFI investment is called the Jobs and Neighborhood Investment Act, would be a huge part of my platform.
Yes.
Another part is an acknowledgement that a lot of the jobs that have disappeared are not coming back after COVID. So we need a whole new approach on job training. I think we ought to give the same kind of equivalent of a research and development tax credit for those companies that will invest in human capital. Why do we have a tax code now that if a company buys a robot, you get an R&D tax credit and the robot's an asset? If a company invests in two human beings to be more efficient than the robot, you don't get any of the same tax treatment or not viewed as an asset. I think we need a dramatic change on investment in human capital. And again, because the percentage of people who have lost their jobs from COVID are disproportionately black and brown.
Right.
Third is, I do think we need in our education system to get more, and this is where, again, coming back to HBCU's role, we need more teachers of color in our K-12 systems. The data that shows that if by third grade, a young black child has a black teacher, particularly a black male teacher, the percentage chances of that child getting in trouble go down dramatically. Their academics go up, and again, some of our best area to make sure that we are continuing to train black educators is our HBCUs. So education, workforce development, access to capital on the economic side, recognition that I had it probably extra advantages as a white guy and trying to make sure, can't guarantee everybody success, but we ought to guarantee everybody equality of opportunity, and then expansion of coverage with the Affordable Care Act, not restricting it.
You know, Senator, you mentioned one thing in your platform. I mean, those are all spot on and important, not just for the Commonwealth, but really for the African American community, because as you stated, you know, there's the lack of opportunity in an even and fair playing field. And there are two areas that you mentioned, one being the court, another being healthcare. I want to ask you about the U.S. Supreme Court. In recent news, there's been the high-profile story of the nomination of current appellate judge Barrett by President Trump, and the Senate of Mitch McConnell saying that they're going to force this through before the election. And of course, we look back just 4 years ago, when President Obama put up Merrick Garland.
Yes, sir.
Well, first of all, what are your thoughts on how the Republican part of the Senate is handling this? And then secondly, what hangs in the balance in the event that the Supreme Court gets this 6-3?
Well, it's, Mitch McConnell changed the rules back in 2016 and said in the presidential year, you should let the people vote. Well, this case, after Justice Ginsburg passed away, we'd already started voting in Virginia. So let's go ahead and let the people vote and have their say.
Right.
And what's at stake is literally the week after the election, a Supreme Court case will be argued about the future of the ACA. And I'm fearful that a 6-3 court would throw out the ACA. I think that would be wrong. I think a 6-3 court would also end up, restricting a woman's right to make personal health care decisions. A 6-3 court, conservative court, might cut back even further on voting rights.
Right.
A 6-3 court would I think, in a sense, say that gun rights are more important than voting rights. So there's been some judge. I understand Judge Barrett has written something on that topic. So this decision is extraordinarily important, and one that I hope will motivate as many people as possible to get out and vote. And since in Virginia, we now have the ability to vote early. I've already voted in every community. You can vote for 45 days up until October 31st, and I sure as heck would hope that people will take advantage of that.
I'll come back to voting as our last topic here, but I want to touch on health care. Now, you mentioned COVID, how COVID is hitting the African American community fairly difficult, more so than other communities. And in part is because of the lack of health care, access to health care. And currently there's been a bill put up. Senator Kane was on the show. He talked about it and your support for it, to increase access of hospitals and African American HBCU universities offering health care programs, and more specifically medical schools. Tell us more about the importance of that bill, and how do you foresee Norfolk State University's role playing in that?
Well, I think, we've got a real challenge in Hampton Roads with Eastern Virginia Medical School, and the fact that it's not aligned immediately with any four-year institution. And I know there's some conversations between EVMS and ODU. I think those conversations ought to include Norfolk State. We're down to only a couple of medical schools in the country that have an affiliation with an HBCU.
Yes.
I think we ought to expand that. We need more black docs, and some level of whether full medical school or at least public health school affiliation that Norfolk State could play a major role, I think would be terribly important. Because unfortunately, if we look at even beyond COVID, if we look at the healthcare outcomes of the African American community in Hampton Roads, it's way below even the national standards for African Americans on healthcare. We have a much sicker population, much more chronic illness, and I think one of the ways that we could address that is by making and having Norfolk State part of the solution.
Awesome. Senator, before you go, we want to talk about voting. There's been a lot of talk about whether this would be a free and fair election. We've had issues with the post office coming from, and all these directives coming from the White House down to heads of the agencies that he's appointed in interim positions and the like. What is your stance on the fair and free election that we're going to have, and what would you tell the citizens of Hampton Roads about the importance of going out and voting early?
Well, listen, I think this is the most important election in our lifetime. And I'm not just saying that because I'm on the ballot. I think, we have a president right now who, in front of the whole nation, refused to denounce white supremacists and militant groups. We have a president who's questioning the democratic outcome of the election and whether he'll abide by it. We have a president who's disrespected all of our veterans and acknowledged that he didn't tell the American people the truth about COVID. So, I would just urge all of our listeners, please get out and vote. You can vote. There's, in Norfolk, for example, there's 3 different locations. You can go to iwillvote.com to find out where those locations are beyond simply the registrar's office. You can vote 9 to 5 any weekday up until October 31st. There'll be a couple Saturdays when voting will be available. I know there's multiple sites, I believe, in Virginia Beach. We need to see the kind of numbers, particularly from the African American community, that we saw when President Obama ran. And if we have that kind of turnout, and Virginia being one of the states that will report early on, our polls close at 7 o'clock on Tuesday, November 3rd. We have a big enough margin in Virginia, then I think the ability for some of the president's supporters to try any funny business will be dramatically undermined. So please, please get out and vote and recognize that there are many countries, not only you hear these comments from the president, but there are countries like Russia and others that want to try to spread chaos in our elections. And the best thing we can do to fight that is vote.
Senator, in the words of the late, now great John E. Lewis, former U.S. Congressman, the vote is our most powerful tool, nonviolent tool in a democracy. Vote, vote, vote. Vote early and vote often. U.S. Senator Mark Warner, we thank you for being on State of the Water. Good luck in the debate, and welcome to Norfolk State University, home of the Spartans.
Eric, thank you so much for what you do, and thank you for the public service you provide by having this show on.
You got it. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Bye-bye.
This is why we bring policymakers and movers and shakers directly to you. In my interview with Senator Warner, we talked about some very, very important and difficult topics. But as you can see, he hit it head on, and he was honest and transparent about it. We mentioned the healthcare issue. Now, while we talk about COVID, we talk about the importance of COVID, the importance of protecting yourselves, wearing masks, and social distancing, and also the lack of healthcare for African Americans, especially in Hampton Roads. And now we see the impact of it in the highest office in the land. We see the president of the United States has COVID. His wife has COVID. Those that attended the briefing introducing his nominee for the U.S. Supreme Court, they're all popping up with COVID. So it shows you that not only is COVID real, but you've got to adhere to the recommendations of the CDC. Wear your mask, social distance, and make sure that you wash your hands frequently and often. But even if you get sick, we talked about the issue, and he acknowledged it, where in Hampton Roads, we have a disconnect between the people that need the health care and the people that are and the agencies that are not delivering it. So the bill that is put forth, we spoke about it in our interview just briefly. Senator Tim Kaine was on the show earlier last month, and we talked about the bill that was put up in order to create more opportunities for Black doctors, more opportunities for medical facilities in Black communities, in our communities, to deliver the medical services that we need. I'm telling you, this is our time. This is our moment. And our story is getting out there. The public is listening to us. The movers and shakers are listening to us. The world is listening to us. And that what it boils down to is having policy move and create these opportunities for us. But not only that, but he talked about jobs and how COVID in this downturn has really just exposed, what the issues have been all along. We've been saying that these are just not anecdotes or, little stories of one person here, one person there. But when it comes to employment, gainful employment, economic mobility, African Americans, our stories are not heard, and we end up getting the bad side of any brunt or the brunt of any economic downturn. COVID exposed that, but legislation is being put forth to address that. In addition to that, we talked about HBCU funding. And, we're glad because this past year in the legislature here in the Commonwealth, we received the largest appropriations in the history of the university. The largest appropriation in the history of the university. That is something to scream from the mountaintops. But it just doesn't stop there, right? I mean, we've been doing this work. We've been doing it for many, many years, producing great leaders, doctors, lawyers, business professionals, entertainers, and the like in every field and every facet, science and STEM. But we've been doing it on a shoestring budget, right? But we talked about the importance of this funding, and we addressed that. Student loans. We're on a campus now where many of our students rely upon financial aid, and many students across the country, to be very honest with you. And right now, there's an opportunity to engage the student loan debt, to renegotiate the interest rate, and put these interest rates down so low at the historic rates that we have now that it becomes affordable in order to go to college again. But not just interest rates, but how about student loan forgiveness? That's a very important idea that's been put forth in this time period. And that's one thing that we've addressed with the policymakers, but it takes us, the public, to continue to push them. And finally, white supremacy. We've seen it here firsthand in the Commonwealth. First in Charlottesville with the Unite the Right march and movement, where unfortunately a young lady lost her life, all because one group believes that they're above another. That's where hate breeds. That's where miseducation breeds. That's where misinformation finds a home. But on State of the Water, we're here to diffuse that. We're here to bring both sides, all sides here, to really talk about those issues and find out what the real truth is. So now, let's hear what his challenger, Dr. Daniel Gade, has to say. Welcome. This is State of the Water, and today we have candidate for U.S. Senate challenging current U.S. Senator Mark Warner here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, Dr. Daniel Gade. Welcome to State of the Water.
Hello. I'm so glad to be on. Thank you so much.
Dr. Gabe, right now you've been campaigning here in the Commonwealth, all over the Commonwealth. Many people didn't really know much about you, but you came on the scene and you made quite the impression. For our listeners, can you give us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So this is Daniel Gade, spelled G-A-D-E, and I'm the Republican nominee for United States Senate from Virginia. And I have spent my entire career as a servant and never as a politician before this. So I enlisted in the United States Army when I was 17 years old, and a year later went off to West Point as a cadet and graduated from West Point in 1997 and then served for 20 years as a U.S. Army officer, during which time I was wounded in combat twice in Iraq and decorated for valor. And then the second time I was wounded, my entire right leg was amputated, and so I spent a year in the hospital, which was not great. and then I went and got a master's degree and a PhD in public policy, and worked at the White House for a year doing veterans policy for President Bush. And then during the Obama administration, I worked on a couple of national level disability and veterans councils. And then after I retired from the Army in 2017, I worked in the Trump administration at the Department of Labor, helping veterans find jobs. So I have a thick portfolio of public service, and but I've never run for any public office before. And so this race is an opportunity to give people a chance to choose a career servant instead of a career politician.
Dr. Gade, first of all, thank you for your service. You know, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, more specifically the Hampton Roads area, where you'll be here on the campus of Norfolk State University in Norfolk, Virginia, where you'll be facing current sitting U.S. Senator Mark Warner. What does it mean to be a veteran and being here in Hampton Roads for this debate, speaking to all of the veterans that are located in our wonderful region?
Absolutely. You know, all of us who are veterans have chosen, at least at one point in our lives, to lay down ourselves for our fellow citizens. And Jesus said, and I think it's the book of Matthew, says, you know, no greater love hath any man than this, and he laid down his life for his friends. And so that's what we as veterans know in our bodies, what that means. And so for me, I look forward to earning the vote of my fellow veterans, regardless of whether they're white or black or gay or straight or Hispanic or male or female. It doesn't matter. I am interested in earning their vote, and because we share much more in common than the things that separate us.
Dr. Gade, you mentioned that you have been a lifelong servant, of course, military service, the awards for valor, and also working in federal government in the Bush White House. Tell us a little bit about why you chose to put your foot in this race to serve the people of the Commonwealth as their next U.S. Senator.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's funny you said put your foot in, because I only have one foot, so that's perfect. So you know, I
no pun intended. No pun intended.
Exactly. That's hilarious. So I jumped in this race because I feel as though right and left, Democrat and Republican Party, have poorly served our country and our Constitution for really my whole lifetime. You know, I don't think anybody can look at Washington D.C. and career politicians and say, "Oh, great, these two people totally have our interests in mind." Instead, we see politicians who have their self-interests in mind. And so I'm in this strictly to serve the Constitution. You know, I don't need any new titles. I don't need to be called anything fancy. I don't care about any of that stuff. I just care about service. And so, you know, my titles as dad and husband and you know, doctor and colonel and all that, those are fine. But really, at the end of the day, I'm just a servant, and I'm not doing this for title or prestige. And if you look at Washington, D.C., there's way too many people who, and frankly, you know, Senator Warner falls in this category as somebody who has always wanted to be in politics. He's always wanted to be in the limelight. He's always wanted to be somebody and not to just serve others. And that's my goal in life, is to serve others.
Dr. Gade, you mentioned Washington. You mentioned wanting to, you know, change things and be of service. What's one of the main criticisms that you would give what's going on in Washington now?
I would say corruption and self-dealing are two of the main issues that I see. You know, so when COVID hit back in, you know, January, it looked like COVID was going to hit, and we sort of all knew it was coming. One of the first things that a bunch of senators did was call their stock managers and say, "Hey, you know, dump all the airline and travel stocks, because, you know, we're going to get crushed by this pandemic." And so they saved themselves instead of doing what they should have done to save the American people. And, you know, I just hate that. It makes my skin crawl, because as a career servant, the idea of being a self-dealer like that is absolutely repugnant to me. And I just think there's way too much of that in Washington. So what I've done, I've proposed a bill that would apply to the legislative and executive branch, that when people get elected, they have to put all their holdings, their financial holdings, in a blind trust. And the reason for that is simply that it would separate the public service part from the personal profit part. And too many of our public servants have gotten rich off of non-public information. And I just find that to be repugnant. So it's an anti-corruption bill, but it's more like a service bill. It's a bill that would require people to be servants rather than career politicians.
Dr. Gade, you mentioned corruption, and there's been a lot to do in Washington now with talks of dysfunction. And what is your take on the discourse and just the language, just the attitudes in Washington, especially given the first presidential debate that we just witnessed?
Oh yeah, I mean, I hate it. Look, I come from a career in the military where people are supposed to treat each other with respect. People are supposed to be kind to each other, even if they disagree on some things. And so I just hate the state of discourse in our country. I come from a place where even if you hate somebody, like if you're a soldier and you're working alongside somebody who you just don't like very much, and people run into others that they don't like much, when the bullets are flying, you're all on the same team. And I feel like these people should all be on the same team and should work together to solve America's hard problems rather than retreating to their partisan corners. And that's something where, just a criticism of Mark that I think is going to come out in the debate tomorrow, and then everybody will see it on Monday when it airs. A criticism that people will see is that he has been co-opted by the radical part of his party, and he just votes with them all the time. And I just don't think that's what Virginia deserves. Virginia deserves somebody who is independent and a fighter, and not somebody who is a rubber stamp for or against any party.
Dr. Gade, you mentioned rubber stamping and party, not just affiliation, but party loyalty. If you're elected as our next U.S. Senator, you'll be the freshman senator here in the Commonwealth. Senator Tim Kaine would then be elevated to the senior status. But you'll come into a Senate that may be controlled by the Republicans with Mitch McConnell. And it's a possibility that we'll have the reelection of President Donald J. Trump. What is your take on, and what would be your stance when it comes to choosing between the two? Because right now it seems to be friction between the head of the Republican Party and the head of our country, our commander-in-chief. And when it comes down to policy, there's a side that you have to take. But what would be your stance in that situation?
Well, my stance is this, that I'm only loyal to the Constitution and to my fellow Virginians, and not to a party leader, and not to, the senior senator from the state of X, whether it's the senior senator from the state of Kentucky, who is, of course, the majority leader, or the senior senator from Virginia. I'm loyal to the Constitution and the people of Virginia. And so my vow to the folks is that I'm going to be an independent senator who is willing to be with my party when they're right, and willing to say to my party that they're wrong when they're wrong, because on occasion they are wrong. And I've been totally unafraid my whole life to say what's true. And in this case, I'm happy to admit when my party is wrong.
Dr. Gade, on your website, and also your commercials and the various campaign platforms that you're participating in, you've talked about protecting individual liberties and civil rights. And right now we're in a time period of Black Lives Matter. And a lot of individuals in the country feel that their civil rights may also hang in the balance, especially with the next Supreme Court nominee and the pending confirmation of that. What would you say to those individuals that believe that their rights have been abridged and their voices simply haven't been heard for quite some time?
That's exactly right. I mean, we've had a political system. One of the reasons I'm running, frankly, is because career politicians have failed us, and they have failed to protect individual liberties and civil rights. And you see that in a couple ways. You see that in a criminal justice system, which is undoubtedly stacked against men in particular and black men in specific. And you see that in the way sentencing is carried out. And of course, sentencing is mostly a local and state level issue. It's not one the federal government can do much about, but you see that there, you see that in the death penalty, you see that in incarceration, you see that in the war on drugs, and you see that in policing to an extent as well. And so I'm going to be a champion for people who are downtrodden and who are disadvantaged, and that's something where I'm unafraid to say what's true, and the things I've just said are true things. Now, there's also some other things that are true that we need to to face, and that's like when we have broken families and we have cycles of poverty. Those also contribute to a societal dysfunction as well, and we should recognize that and tackle those things as well. But one thing that's a huge civil rights issue to me is education. We need school choice. We need school choice in a big way, because the children who are trapped in poverty and have to go to poor schools are going to be trapped in poverty forever. And I think that is the civil rights crisis of our time in many ways.
You mentioned schools that are low performing, those that are trapped in poor schools. Historically, schools in African American areas, especially during the time of segregation, and even now after the civil rights movement, we see where still in African American communities, schools are underfunded. You'll be on one of 107 historically black colleges and universities, holding your debate here at Norfolk State University, where only this year the state has really upped and to do what we call a catch-up in funding and one appropriations. But, of course, it doesn't make up for everything, but we're trending in the right direction. What would be your plan if you are elected U.S. Senator for the Commonwealth to level the playing field and get the resources that these schools need in order to continue to produce even more so productive citizens for society?
Well, there's a couple things. One is there's two specific bills, the Educational and Secondary Education Act and the Individuals with Disability and Education Act, both of which are federal programs that could have their funding model changed so the money follows the student and is irrespective of where the student lives, given to the student and the student's family to buy educational services, and that would benefit poor urban kids much more than it would benefit suburban kids whose parents already typically have money to send them and get them the extra services they need. And that's just one thing that we can do to, as you say, level the playing field. But one of the hard things about education that's going to take some creative work to solve is that most education spending is not federal. Only a small percentage is federal spending. In fact, it's mostly local, and it's almost all driven by property taxes. So people in nice neighborhoods with expensive houses pay more property tax, and therefore their schools are nicer, and therefore their kids get smarter, and or get better educated.
Right.
It's a cycle. It's a cycle, and the breaking of that cycle has to occur at the state level, where extra resources are directed into schools, into systems that will result in better outcomes for students. And I think the best way to do it is by choice and competition in education, including charter schools and home schools and parochial schools and high quality public schools. But the tragedy of a failed education system trapping a bright kid in a failing school is something that the black community, especially urban black community, has really suffered under for far, far too long.
In our closing moments, let us know, what are those major platform issues that once you get into Washington, if you're elected as the next U.S. Senator, you're going to tackle head on for the Commonwealth?
Well, a couple of things. And you said for the Commonwealth, so that kind of narrowed it down a little. But here's what I would say. There's a couple things we must do immediately. Number one is we must recognize that budget deficits are our most critical national security threat, and we've got to get our hand around our federal spending, and we got to fix that and get back into a place where we're spending only within our means. Number two is the virus is obviously, the president has it right now. That's a bad story, and the First Lady, of course. But we have a situation where the virus is still running rampant, and we should get relief to struggling Virginia families, and that means passing the bill for COVID relief that Mark Warner voted against. The third thing is we need to fix our education system, and there's some hard work that needs to be done there. And then as a last thing, and for those in your listening area who are military folks, I did not forget about you. We need to work very hard on continuing to keep our military strong, and most importantly, only using them in combat when it's congressionally authorized, instead of this continued endless wars that we've been pursuing for the last 20 years. And that's about respect for military families and respect for the Constitution.
Dr. Gade, as a third-generation veteran myself, I just want to say again, thank you for your service. Thank you for giving your sacrifice. And we also thank you for being on State of the Water here at Norfolk State University. And we're looking forward to seeing you on the big screen here at the university as you engage in the second of third U.S. Senate debates. In the last closing words, do you have anything for our listeners?
Well, I'm thrilled to be with you in Norfolk State tomorrow, and then airing, of course, on Monday. Most importantly, this is a chance for me to come and be with people who are like me, Americans, and are like me, people who love America and want America to thrive. And so I'm going to offer my vision and and who I am as an alternative to career politicians. And then I look forward to taking questions and whatever I can do to serve the folks who are within your listening area. I'm happy to do. And my website is a good place to find out more about me. It's GADEFOR Virginia.com.
Dr. Gade, thank you so much. And for our listeners, you can view the debate on Wavy Channel 10 here in our viewing area. Dr. Gade, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it very much.
757-823-9110. 757-823-9110. Let us know your thoughts on the interviews here with the candidates for the U.S. Senate, U.S. Senator Mark Warner and Dr. Daniel Gade. 757-823-9110. Schools, civil rights, Black Lives Matter. These were some of the topics that we addressed, not just in the interview, but during the debate itself. And once again, for the first time in Norfolk State University's 85-year history, we hosted a live U.S. senatorial debate on the campus between Senator Mark Warner and his challenger, Daniel Gade, at the L. Douglas Wilder Performing Arts Center on yesterday, Saturday, October 3rd, 2020, that focused on racial disparities, inequities in education, healthcare, economic mobility, and the criminal justice system. The university and the Center for African American Public Policy partnered with Wavy 10, an NBC affiliate and Nexstar Media Group station, the Virginia Bar Association, and Visit Norfolk to host this debate. Now, this 90-minute debate streamed live on Wavy.com on yesterday, but it's going to re-air in 4 states and the District of Columbia on tomorrow, Monday, October 5th at 6:30 p.m. on the Wavy affiliate. That debate featured a lot of the issues that we interviewed the candidates about. It featured a lot of the issues that we're talking about even now. And they didn't hold punches back. The debate itself was spirited. The moderators were phenomenal. Regina Mobley, who's an alumna of Norfolk State University, along with Anita Blanton, both did a phenomenal job asking the hard questions to the candidates, asking them what was their stance on these very important issues that are affecting us in the African American community. Because again, as we discussed at the top of the show, the issues that are affecting African Americans, it's important that we bring the policymakers who are at the table in order to make the decisions to improve our lives. But if they don't, then of course it'll make it worse. Because as the old saying goes, if you're not at the table, usually you're on the menu. So during this time period, we discuss with the candidates, what is your stance as it relates to funding for HBCUs, funding for education? What is your stance as it relates to assisting African Americans with the massive job loss, the double unemployment that COVID brought on? And listen, I know we talk about job increases and you hear the reports that are coming out, but are these really good jobs? Are they just minimum wage jobs that are coming back? And are African Americans the ones that are benefiting from them? A lot of times when we see the job reports, it leaves out the very different groups in America who are benefiting. But if you pull back just one more page, like we do here on State of the Water, you'll see the real numbers and how this really affects us. But we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts about what we discussed with the two candidates? What are your thoughts about what's going on now? The U.S. 757-823-9110, 757-823-9110. But not just the debate that's going to be up tomorrow, but I want to talk about a couple of more issues with you. Now, the entire time, the President of the United States berated individuals for wearing masks. He berated even Joe Biden during the presidential debate for wearing a mask. And now we see the president himself with COVID. We see his wife with COVID. We see leaders of our nation in the Senate popping up, testing positive for COVID, and some actually being hospitalized. What are your thoughts about the president contracting COVID? What are your thoughts about the stability of the country? You know, there's been a few reports and a lot of discussion about the 25th Amendment and the stability of our country and how the transition of power would take place in the event that the president becomes incapacitated. But what is the definition of incapacitated? You know, does it mean that you simply are having a really bad fever and you have to take a few sick days from work? Or does it mean that you're on a ventilator and you can't make decisions? Or does it mean the actual words that you've died or passed away? What is that definition of incapacitated? You know, this is something that we're going to debate for a few days. I mean, we're hoping the best for everyone who contracts this novel virus that's overtaken the world. But at the same time, we also have to keep in mind that we have a country of over 300 million people that need solid leadership, that need to be led, the policy that's led, that's pushed through for the American people and for the world. So we want to make sure that everyone's taken care of. We want to make sure that, you know, the president gets well, everyone that contracted the virus gets well, and we want to make sure that the resources that our communities need, they get it. So this is a very, very important time, but not just for the country and politics, but I go back to the court. You know, right now, the president nominated Amy Coney Barrett to take Ruth Bader Ginsburg position, that the seat that she held at the U.S. Supreme Court. And right now, Mitch McConnell is pushing this thing through. You know, he's using the nuclear option where it only takes a simple majority to stop the debate for it and also to approve the next Supreme Court justice. What if this has a tremendous effect upon the balance of the court, upon laws that are passed, upon that are then challenged in the court? Now, keep in mind that the lower courts really decide many of these issues that we're talking about. But there are some very, very important issues, especially dealing with voting, dealing with civil rights, that are going to get challenged and that are going to reach the high court. Just several years ago, pre-clearance was basically done away with for southern states and states that historically discriminated against and created stumbling blocks and suppressed and oppressed the vote of African Americans and others. And now we're seeing this happening again. That's the importance of voting. That's the importance of putting people in office that will go to Washington, that will go to the State House, that will go to the City Council, that will go to the school board and ensure that they have your best interests at heart. But if we don't get out and vote, if we don't register, then there's no way that we're going to get our voices heard. As a matter of fact, when we talk about Election Day, who are you going to vote for? Why are you going to vote for them? 757-823-9110. 757-823-9110. We're talking about the debate that took place on the campus of Norfolk State University just on last night between U.S. Senator Mark Warner and his Republican challenger, Dr. Daniel Gade, which will re-air on Wavy 10 at 6:30 on tomorrow. But you can stream it right now on Facebook at Wavy 10 or nsu.edu. But not just that, but we're also talking about the president and the report that he now has COVID. And we haven't even touched on the debate yet between the president and Vice President Joe Biden. What are your thoughts about, that particular exchange between the leader of the free world and his challenger? Many people, some call it a debate. I call it a debacle. Some say there was no civility. It was just simply chaos. I don't think that this is how we want to represent our country. I don't think that this is the leader, the type of behavior we want our leaders to exude to the rest of the world. The rest of the world is looking at the United States and saying, this is democracy. This is what freedom looks like. This is what your leaders look like. This is what they're telling their children. This is what they're telling the world. I don't think so. I think that we need our leaders that are in office and ready, and those who are running to be elected to office, to really have the decorum, to really have the civility that it takes to lead people, but not just lead people, but also to work together collegiately as colleagues in the House, in the Senate, behind the offices, in caucus meetings, between each other, in the State House, in the governor's mansion, in the city council halls, on the school boards, because we're all in it together, right? As the United States rises, we all rise. But if it falls, that means we all fall. So if you thought about not voting, hopefully these several events that just happened this week changed your mind. Hopefully you'll get out and you'll go register to vote. Keep in mind, Election Day is November 3rd. The registration deadlines is October 13th. October 13th is the deadline to register online. Okay? You don't have to go inside of the building. You can register online, or you can mail it in as long as your registration is postmarked by October 13th. But if you'd like to go into the clerk of court's office, the voter registration department in your city, you can go in by October 13th. Now, keep in mind that absentee ballot deadlines, requests, you can receive them by October 23rd. As long as you request your absentee ballot by October 23rd, you'll get it. And you got to return it by mail, have it postmarked by Election Day, November 3rd. And also, if you want, you can vote in person, November 3rd at 7 p.m. Now, early voting has already started in the Commonwealth. It started September 18th, and it goes all the way through October 31st. Vote, vote, vote. Remember the importance of voting. Let your voice be heard. And here at WNSB, we're doing our part with Vote the Movement. So, again, vote, vote, vote. I'm your host, award-winning Dr. Eric Claville, and you have listened to Stay in the Water. We'll see you next Sunday.